speaker. Tonight we have Michelle Week of Squeit, or the Good Rain Farm. Michelle is of the Sinai, also known as Arrow Lakes ancestry. That's a First Nations people from the Okanagan country. For those of you who don't know where the Okanagan is, it comes from British Columbia down into north central Washington. She's a first generation female farmer stewarding land right here in the metro area. And she's going to be speaking on connecting with her ancestral heritage traditions and helping to restore her community's ability to control their own food systems. Welcome, Michelle, and let's get started.
There's the mute button. Hello, good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for joining me tonight. It's a real pleasure and honor to be here to share a little bit about Squeit, Good Rain Farm, and what we do here, how I kind of extend, or we all kind of share all of our expertise and experiences in all of our respective gardens. So hello, my name is Michelle Week. I am Sinai or Arrow Lakes. I use she, her, and her pronouns. And I own and operate Squeit, Good Rain Farm, here in Outer Gresham, Oregon. Currently is where we are located. My landlord is the East Multnomah Soil and Water Conservation District, which you may have been able to partake in additional learnings from, or they do a lot of grants and funding and support work around various gardening activities in the urban city centers. A quick rundown of my family, and yes, you can see the mouse. So my family is actually this red star here. Kettle Falls is where I have family buried. It is the kind of more southern area of where the Arrow Lakes Sinai people would traditionally travel to throughout the days. My family are recognized members of Colville Confederate Tribes, which is this darker giant gray area down here right in the fork of the Snake and Columbia River. And we were considered extinct until 2021 in Canada specifically. So the Colville Confederate Tribes are 12 other tribes. So when people talk about 500 tribes in America, but some of the tribes are confederated tribes, there's that many more tribes. So we are the smallest little tribe of that community there. And my family chose to come down south from the Canadian border, American border there, and join this reservation. But our true homelands are way up here in the Arrow Lakes. So there's these three long lakes at the very top of the screen. And those are the Arrow Lakes. And our creation story is also the Columbia River creation story. So our people were born out of the hot and fiery love of sngaytskstx coyote and squeit rain. Coyote is kind of this mangy trickster bro guy, really, in these days terms. And he kind of convinced and tricked Rain into falling in love with him. And it was a very fast and very deep love. And Rain pulled out her heart, threw it down, creating the Arrow Lakes, carving those out, and then they embraced and flowed in the blood down the Columbia River all the way to the ocean. So definitely lots of metaphors for water as life, a life-giving force. And then at the ocean, sngaytskstx coyote was like, your cousin here, Ocean, is to die for. She is lovely. So he leaves Squeit for her cousin Ocean. But in the waters there at that juncture, at that estuary, in that space, he creates the salmon to return up the river to the Arrow Lakes every year to remind the people and squeit of his undying love, even though he runs off with her cousin. And so out of that the Columbia River waters and the earth there, he creates some flora, fauna, the Arrow Lakes people who are to guard the heart of squeit, the headwaters of the Columbia River, and the salmon come back every year to remind us we're not forgotten, but not really the highest priority. I think it's a pretty funny creation story and also a very classic coyote activity there. So Hast, squeit, I actually named the farm before I knew the creation story. And in the naming of the farm, I reached out to my grandmother and got a whole bunch of family photos and genealogy and ancestry chart trees and dictionaries for our interior Okanagan Salish. That's what it is kind of classically known as. And sorry, I just checked the chat real quick. And I chose hast, squeit because it appeared when I tested it out with friends and family. It was the word combo most people could get kind of close to. It's a different language than English. It's a dying language, just as our people were considered extinct until 2021. And that got resolved because someone went to our traditional territories and hunted in our usual and accustomed places, as the treaties normally say it in. And they got some ungulate, some elk or moose. And then they went through the court proceedings and proved that we are, in fact, still here. And so when I chose to name the farm and really refocus on Indigenous first foods and food sovereignty, coming from my authentic place and identity, I ran it by my grandmother and mother once I kind of did some testing of the name and brand. And they were really excited, actually. And it turns out my grandmother knew some of the language and I just never knew that. So I've been practicing it ever since. And it's just wonderful to be able to put it out there in the world, make it visible, and have people practice wrapping their tongues around this ancient language to this place. So our goal is to revitalize culture. Language is one way that we do that, and to build community. And we do that through our CSA, our community supported agriculture. So it's a little quote from me, basically saying the same thing. I'm going to make that smaller. So through food and language, I have had the opportunity to conserve, celebrate, and keep visible my Native heritage and worldview and cultural practices, and to also uplift my cousins and my siblings and my other Indigenous community members in this practice as well. Yeah, distracted with those chats. So I'll talk a little bit more about our Reverent Stewardship. You are all talented master gardeners, and I don't need to talk a whole lot about how we operate the farm day to day. It's all very similar to when you starts at your home and manage your garden, just on a much larger scale with slightly different tools. I wanted to share with you today more about how I approach this work from my heart and my soul, like my presence to this and my intentions that I bring to it is kind of what sets our farm apart often from other farms, and especially from conventional farming. I think a lot of smaller farmers have a lot to relate to how I approach, but when we talk about larger farms, and our larger food system and production commodities farming, it's definitely a different approach. And I have very much experienced that being a jarring, almost culture shock when working with government entities that we do. So this is what I have many mentors. Of course, my grandmother and my mother were the first people who got me out into the garden, out huckleberry picking, and working with the soil. But as I've focused more on seed saving and farming and agriculture specific approaches, I've met a lot of other great Indigenous women out there doing awesome work. So Rowan White here is a Mohawk seed keeper who actually resides in Northern California. And it says, what comes back down, what that comes back down to is an honoring of origins, an honoring of what I call intimate immensities. A seed is so big and so small at the same time. So one of the things we do here on the farm is seed saving, but really also sharing of food stories and reconnecting people to their ancestry and the histories and these co-evolved relationships we have with the flora and fauna of our homelands and our homes here. And I really enjoy building that relationship and kinship with the soil and all the microorganisms there, and with the plants and with the animals. I very much love all of the birds that visit the farm. I think I've seen almost like 30 different species here on the farm, doing different aspects, right? The great blue herons will actually eat like moles and voles. And hummingbirds come and drink from our pole beans and whatnot. So it's really lovely to see all their different contributions and diversity of approaches to life here on the farm. So I have here, and you should receive a copy of the presentation and a PDF as well, with additional readings and references and things. But I thought I would read to you my version of this. I am from poem template or poem format. It has suggestions there. So you have your basic outline. I am from the various senses. And then a suggestion to write the poem about your childhood home, your ancestral lands, or also your current community and the current people around you, so the current place as well. I recognize that some of these things are complex and can hold a lot of pain as well as joy. And so just kind of follow your heart and find where the joy and the like homemaking is, where it feels that you settle into that. I think is all right. Those are just suggestions and guides. And same with the tips down there as well. Generally, this is a practice in gratitude and in, I'm a really skewed negative bias person. I think a lot of us kind of have a tendency to be more negative biased than positive biased. So kind of the challenge here is to like practice being a little more, find that joy in our world. It's hard these days, I know, but it's good to stretch out those muscles and give it a go. In this poem, everyone's poem comes out so beautiful and gorgeous. So you're a poet and you didn't even know it. I'll read you mine. I am from the smell of recent rain as it seeps into the humus of the forest floor. The fresh scent of newly budding pine needles. I am from the taste of the warm, tangy huckleberries that stain my hands the taste of salty, oily, melt in your mouth salmon. I am from the sight of gray wisps of clouds weaving through the rich evergreen trees. The sound of rain as it pitter-patters against the leaves as I fall asleep at night. I am from the touch of delicate lady ferns and rough scraping of sword ferns as we play Jurassic Park in the coastal forest. I am from people who persevered, traveled great distances to provide a home and secure a future for their children and their children's children. Strong, resilient, and bold. So I hope you give that a try. I really love this poem, and I would love to see or read or hear yours also. I really enjoy this format. It's been passed on down to me from other various organizations. I think it's a good one to practice. Checking on the chat. Okay. I mentioned food stories earlier, and I knew I'd get to them. So the I Am From poem really kind of grounds us in a place, whether that is ancestral or our current place here in the Pacific Northwest. But we all bring our ancestral stories with us. So this image here actually is where we get carving of pumpkins. So some of you may know that pumpkins, those big orange gourds, are native to the Americas. But carving them isn't a well-documented activity here in the Americas. But in Ireland, in Celtic communities, they would carve turnips, beets, potatoes, radishes. So, and that's where we get carving pumpkins today. And I believe it's Samhain is a Celtic language, translates to summer's end. No, okay, so it's Gaelic. It's not, I'm not Irish. I'm French and Arrow Lakes. So Samhain is the word in Gaelic that translates to summer's end. Is the quote there I pulled from the Smithsonian, and out of context that reads funny. So I really love it. I love sharing this story with our community supported agriculture, our CSA members every year, to help folks reconnect to their ancestors and their identities a little bit more. And this is just a snapshot. You know, I share a lot about our indigenous first foods that I focus in on the farm. So when I grow pumpkins, I grow Seminole pumpkins and talk about the Seminole tribe out of the Southeast. And we share in amaranth, or I have like Hopi black sunflowers and some other food varieties, and we tell those stories. But I also bring in some of our European foods as well and kind of reground into those foods. And I think just building that relationship, again, we all co-evolved with a food, and we influenced it, and it nourished us, and of course embeds into our DNA and like influences how we evolve and become in a place. And I think it's really good for us to remember that we have this really long relationship that transcends our lifetimes, comes all the way back, and is going to go all the way forward in our generations, and nourish us and keep us together. So I like learning about these relationships that we had. These little heads, the idea here is they would protect people during the like veil, right? It's very thin time, so very classic fall time beliefs around when fall ends and winter begins is kind of throughout the world. So they protect you from malicious spirits that might have come through the veil and be roaming around the village at that time. I also think they're like super creepy and maybe a better Halloween decoration than our goofy missing tooth pumpkins. So for Indigenous people, I just have some quotes here. Our language is really important in our languages, we are reminded of our place in the world and our kind of role that we play in our ecosystems. It is reinforced in the way that we contextualize our language. English is very object-based, and in a lot of Indigenous languages, it is a lot more to be, or like a personhood language. So we have a lot more giving of agency to other things in the world that we interact with. They all have lives and experiences and languages of their own. And it is for us to listen and tend to them and be gracious to them, because really without the plants and the animals and the earth, we wouldn't have a home to live on or things to consume to nourish us and continue our lives. So there's a lot of gratitude built into the languages and the cultures as well. So we have here a song that Linda Different Cloud Jones speaks of. She is a Lakota Sioux Nation member. And that this song just kind of reinforces a worldview and behavior to support kind of our approach to gathering and collecting food there. And so when we lose that language and lose these songs, it's kind of the death, a little bit of death to our culture and our worldview and how we become present in a place with our intentions. In Arrow Lakes, that is the Babbling Brook. So as I was learning and going through the dictionaries, they're not perfect, right? A lot of those dictionaries were begun by European anthropologists in the in the 1800s. So it's a very different time and a very different approach. So what we have now is just a whisper or a memory of these languages. And they've been kind of contorted into to use the English letters to for us to attempt to write them down and try them again. But there was a language known as the Babbling Brook I came across, and it was a women's language that was distinct, and it sounded like and blended in with creeks gurgling. So when women were out gathering foods or doing, laundry or something in the creeks or whatnot, their language would blend into gurgling creeks. And that was kind of a little bit of camouflage. And also like a distinct and unique language to just the femmes in the community. So not a language we have anymore, but it reminds me when I go down to creeks and I listen to them, that's a language. And I know we often think of water or a creek or rocks as just objects that don't, they're not like a dog looking at you whining or something. It's hard in our society to kind of give that animacy and that personhood to those more inanimate objects, but they are speaking. And I try to listen to those creeks and think, am I hearing the words of my ancestors? Are those words, if I listen long enough, maybe I can start to pick it up again. I don't know. So, but it also just kind of grounds me in that we are surrounded by all these other beings right? And we know that plants react really well to sound and noise and singing, and that's why you'll find lots of songs in agriculture. It's not just a way for people to be joyful and like make the time tick by through some arduous tasks. But that coevolution, the plants have learned to enjoy the constant twittering of birds and the rustling of wind and the people and their joy coming through. And there's a really, oh, I hope I linked it in the PDF. There's an amazing study done many years ago on, they had 2 broccoli plants and they had people walk by, and one broccoli plant, I don't remember the setup, so this may be somewhat wrong, but it's the general idea. One broccoli plant would get like positive feedback or be ignored. So it would get like pats on the head, sweet talk, baby talk to it. And then another broccoli plant would be like insulted and even like harmed. Someone would like rip off a piece of its leaf. And at the end of the study, like the negative broccoli plant was like sad and the happy broccoli plant was doing really well. And there was probably a third broccoli plant just there to witness it all. And it was just kind of, it was okay, but it like that positive broccoli plant was like thriving. It was such an interesting study. And if you read The Secret Life of Trees also, I believe that was a German forester who wrote that book. Correct me if I'm wrong. But such a beautiful insight into how trees communicate and support their community, and how they'll redirect nutrition and water to damaged trees or ill trees and support them, and why their communities are so important to them and their different language and sense and sound that they have is really, it's just really beautiful. And it's that kind of personhood that I remember I'm working with my plants that I'm growing and tending to. And I remind them and I talk to them and I'm honest with them that like, I'm going to take their lives to nourish people, but I'm also going to do my best to collect seed from them and keep the next generation going and really give them the best life until then. And that I'm really grateful for that gift of theirs, that they are willing and able to give their lives and that our bodies are able to process that nutrition, right? So it's like every day I have my chores and my routine and it like feels really daily. And if you shadowed me, it feels so boring and mundane. But it's a memory of that. The little bar is hiding things. Oh no. Oops. It's just another quote from another teacher of mine. But this bar, Valerie Segrest, Muckleshoot, there we go. Is a really great way of thinking about this, right? Bringing your ancestors with you, walking through the grocery store and thinking, what would make them proud of the decisions you're making? And I think also too, we talk so much about whole foods. And of course, that's what I grow here on the farm are like raw vegetables to distribute to community. But I'm not gonna knock anyone for the occasional hot Cheetos. That's some good soul food, some good mental health food. Like it's valid, it's good if it makes you happy and brings you a little bit of comfort and joy in that time. I am very much partial to an emotional support latte. And I'm very grateful for our long spice trade history globally, and that coffee beans are in that trade routes and have made their way all over. I appreciate the coffee trees and the coffee beans. So it's just one way to kind of remember and think about how we're really not that much further apart from our ancestors and how they lived and how we're living now. Coffee really hit the scene long years and years ago, right? Like a century ago. So it's been around. Everyone up and down the family tree most likely understands that need. So here I have another little kind of template and project for you to take home, and to help really build and root into your family's heritage or heirloom foods, your ancestral foods, and really dig into creating that relationship with them. A lot of our crop planning revolves around finding Turtle Island or North American indigenous first foods, as well as using the Arc of Taste. And I like to poll employees and volunteers early in the season about their ancestry, and then try to select crop varieties off of that so that we can like build that relationship, tend to the seeds, grow them, plant them, and enjoy them on our dinner plates. So, and I include there finding its indigenous name, right? Finding the name of which the people of that place, because we're all indigenous to a place. We're indigenous to Europe, we're indigenous to America, we're all indigenous to a place. So going back to that place and reconnecting to that community and culture and finding that name, I think is a really key component to really reconnecting to those plants and animals. So again, you'll have a version of this so you can come back and then work through this worksheet. Some more practical things I do at the farm that I love to share with people, that was really instilled in me by actually the People's Food Co-op in Southeast Portland, is purchasing guidelines or buying guidelines. So for us, we prioritize BIPOC owned and USA made. We do try to purchase used first, whatever possible, off of these various resource sites. Definitely buy local, and I'll even work with custom crafters to make tools or fix things as needed. And buying cooperative. Wilco Farm Store there, True Value, or like, and Winco. I don't know if you all been to Winco. It is the co-op version of Costco, and they have an amazing book section as well. Highly recommend Winco. That's where we get a lot of our snasket. We have a wicker basket full of snacks. The snasket gets refilled from Winco. So yeah, that's kind of our, you can snag a screenshot or again, wait for the PDF of this and kind of incorporate this into your daily activities as you're out having to buy or replace things. And I'm sure you all know about backyard habitat. Backyard. It would be cool if there was like herpetology is frogs and salamanders. We need a backyard herpetology certification program, but a backyard habitat program, mostly birdies focused, but doing that, the pollinator habitat, choosing not to use pesticides and things, right? These are just like more practical realistic approaches as we continue to expand and build and do that work of reconnection. We also have like very real approaches to supporting the world we walk and live in. I keep trying to use my arrows, but it wants a click from the mouse. Oh my goodness, I got fancy and I forgot. So I've gone through a watershed stewardship program and a master composter recycler program. I am not a master gardener, so I apologize for not quite having that certification yet, even though I'm a farmer. And then another way we bring a lot of these values to life on the farm is through what I call the payment pathways on the farm. So we accept food stamps, we do sliding scale pricing and payment plans, and then we also don't turn anyone away for lack of funds. So we do our scholarship fund. So anyone can gift to our scholarship fund. And I do a lot of grant writing for that. And that helps kind of offset sometimes the sliding scale or other people's needs. If they just need free food, I just want to make sure people have good, equitable food access to some good, nourishing food. Pictured here is some of our Swiss chard. And I just want to make sure it's accessible. And part of accessibility is also we offer home delivery and have various pickup sites around town. But you too, I'm sure a lot of you as master gardeners grow plentiful amounts of veggies when you engage in veggie production and share it with your neighbors and family, and maybe a free fridge or two as well around the neighborhood. But that's just one way we've incorporated it into the economics of the business plan and how the farm operates as well. And it's something I continue to teach other farms as well, to try to further those efforts beyond just me and squeit. So we have another quote here from White. Seed keepers help indigenous communities reconnect with the land through reestablishing the ancient crops that sustained their ancestors, right? And that's the reestablishing to that relationship, that kinship we share with these plants and animals. So I have here a few rules that were handed down to me by elders, various elders. I've gathered them all. Some people only had one or two, and I've gathered nearly 7 almost rules that I try to think about and embody on the farm as well. So always, and this is, this often comes up where people want to talk about foraging or wild crafting. And I think that has a place. I also think that we have deeply hurt and damaged our wild areas, right? It's not quite wild. People have always been involved in these ecosystems. We're just another mammal in that circle of life out there. But when we removed people, it caused a lot of damage, and then a lot of our industriousness and construction and whatnot also has caused some damage. So I think it's good and okay to practice foraging and wildcrafting, but it's also part of the reason why I started the farm, was to try to eventually, since I rent, it's hard to commit to the perennials. We do a lot more annuals. I think I just confused those two. Leave it to me during a live presentation. Yeah. So we, like those huckleberries that I mentioned in my poem that I would go out to harvest with my grandmother, a lot of those fields don't exist anymore. And my goal with the farm is to eventually grow or attempt to grow or continue to foster and support those foods on the farm, and reestablish, turn that farmland to that natural ecosystem state in a way that can then sustain and feed community at a scale, right? Not just familial, but much wider than that. So anyways, the rules here of reciprocity and relations is to bring a gift, and that could be singing or talking to the plants. Definitely saying thank you and offering gratitude and building that relationship, especially when out wild crafting, returning to a place and just being with them without harvesting is a great way to continue to build that relationship and to observe them through all the different seasons, not just the one season where they are giving to you, but all those seasons where maybe you notice during the, their dormant season, there's something you can give them. So that's one of the guidelines I've been passed down. Another one is to skip every 7th plant as an active reminder of the generations. And that kind of combines with this next one, never take the oldest or the youngest plant, because the elder plants need to teach the younger plants how to plant. Just like we need elders and guides and adults as we are young and growing up to help guide us and teach us ways in this world. They do too. And that is something we do practice out in the field, is giving space to those plants, right? So we're thinning and harvesting to sell for production in this economy, but we're also kind of practicing recognizing that the plants need cheerleaders and each other to kind of thrive and do really well. And it also, ultimately means that more of the soil is still covered when we leave a plant every so often. It stays larger and more mature, so it tends to help cover up some of the soil we've been exposed as we harvest them down. So there's a lot of different tiny ways that this is all webbed together. I definitely put in here, observe the surroundings and consider pollution exposure and to ask permission, right? So even in our urban areas, getting to know neighbors who might have an apple tree hanging over that tree, over that fence that you can kind of reach. There's law and there's, a good way to go about it, and building those relationships and speaking with people and then bringing them that canned jar of applesauce or something afterwards can really help strengthen relationships and community. And I think it's a really good way to go about kind of asking that permission and observing our surroundings. And I put in here that you can reach out to your native tribes of our area. So here in Multnomah County, we have a lot of the Warm Spring tribes, the Grand Ronde tribes, and the Cowlitz tribe, and the Sinixt tribe, which is they're still fighting for federal recognition. So even I struggle to communicate. They're very busy. There's a lot going on always on tribes and in tribal governments. So they're unlikely to respond. But they'll always accept gifts, or sending gifts is always a really great way to support them and their efforts, right? So of course, money, that's the big one, especially when you're fighting for federal recognition as the Chinook people are. But if you have space and the safety, I know that tobacco and the other solanaceae can carry that mosaic virus, but growing that is definitely a great thing to share with people, and sharing seeds that you might save as well is a great way to kind of share gifts and build reciprocity and relationship with people. And that kind of falls into pay real rent there. A lot of Native people have to buy foraging permits or licensing just like anybody else does. But when you tend to be in a lower economic bracket or have darker skin, you can't get away often with not having those on you. And a lot of our forests and wildlands require those kinds of permits or licensing. So gifting money and paying those kind of real rents to the tribes as kind of reparations and reciprocity is a great way to also kind of recognize that privilege and ability to go out and forage and wild harvest. And then of course, saving seed. is a great gift to the plant that you are engaging with and harvesting from. And just again, reestablishing that and really engaging in that coevolution that we have and this relationship we have with them, these intergenerational relationships. So I want to make sure we have time for Q&As. I'm sorry. Another quick from Robin Wall Kimmerer, has become a very famous Potawatomi woman from her book Braiding Sweetgrass, but she has several other beautiful publications out there as well. This one just actually comes from Braiding Sweetgrass, but having that honorable harvest that asks us to give back in reciprocity for what we have been given. Reciprocity helps resolve the moral tension of taking a life by giving in return something of value that sustains the ones who sustain us. One of our responsibilities as human people is to find ways to enter into reciprocity with the more than human world, with the plant people, the rabbit people, the deer people, right? We can do it through gratitude, through ceremony, through land stewardship, science, art, and in everyday acts of practical reverence. And that's really what I want to share, is that is kind of the intentionality and the way that we walk through on the farm, how we operate is through that practical reverence piece. As a quick one on my Save Our Seeds, we have a seed saving program here on the farm that's taken a few different shapes and forms over the years. But when we do sell the educational kit, it's a buy one, gift one program as a form of reparations and is hands-on education. So we were here harvesting like a mallow, I think. Beginners getting it wrong with you because you're all such expert gardeners. And then this is just some info about my farm. Shameless plug, goodrainfarm.com. You can sign up for our monthly newsletter. And if you'll be traveling too much this summer, we have you for veg. Yeah. All right. I'm happy for you to come off mute if you can, if you want to ask questions, and I will click on this Q&A too.
Hi, again, I was thinking about the language and some that you were talking about, and somebody put in that the language, the Samhain you were talking about earlier, that they just found out that the way to pronounce it is Sawin, which really shows the difficulty in, as you said, moving the language from one way of speaking to another one. You know, we have these 26 letters, but they don't always encompass it. So I also wanted to ask, what is a Seminole pumpkin? Because I think I want to grow one and carve it.
Oh, I like looked around. I was like, do I have one in here? I don't. I have one hanging out in my kitchen. And I can stop share if we want to see faces.
There we go.
Yeah, Seminole pumpkins actually have they look sort of like a very squat acorn. They have some ridges like an acorn squash, but they're squat. And they have the coloration of butternut squash. And they're really cool. I haven't done this because they're little monsters and they had some transplant shock that we worked through. But traditionally, right, the Southeast is a very swampy space where the Seminole people and there's so many other tribes down there. I can't pull it up right now, but because they're ready in the fall, a lot of that land would flood over. So they actually used to have kind of apple trees, fruit trees, strewn out, and then they would plant them and help trellis them up over the limbs of those trees, and then it would all flood, and they'd be curing hanging there, and they would go around in their boats, their canoes, or whatever they call them in their culture, and harvest the apples and other fruit and these pumpkins at the same time. It was a really cool system.
From the canoes.
Yeah.
Oh, wow. Great. One of the questions was also about wondering if you could talk about regenerative agriculture. You know, it's a big word now and a concept. And how do you put that kind of feeling, or how do you relate to that with what the work you do?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, we've always done regenerative ag, essentially, right? I think when we look at traditional ecological knowledge and traditional indigenous approaches to growing agriculture, even down in is it Mesopotamia? I don't know what they call it, down where the Aztecs and I'm gonna get all my geography and history wrong. But the indigenous people down around Mexico, right, they had floating gardens. I can't remember the name of them right now. But they pretty much did regenerative ag as well. I think a lot of our agroforestry approaches, the silvopasture approach, right, that's actually really African-based tribal communities there engaged in a lot of those kinds of practices. And we've just kind of westernized it and brought it into what I call white science, Western science, and like legitimized it through a white lens, and like did our like very specific bullet points. But really regenerative ag has always been here, and when you really look at it as what it is, we've always practiced it. So I think it's funny that it's like a buzzword now. I guess we got tired of organic, and we needed a new cool buzzword. So regenerative ag was it. But it's also like pretty much permaculture. So, and I feel like permaculture was big, but not as big as organic, probably because it was more hippie or something. So I don't know. I think it's a little silly. I think it's a little whitewashy of the practices of our ancestors. But I think overall it's a good thing that we're moving back towards that and we're excited about those practices again. I just wish that we also acknowledged the history and where it comes from more often.
So you have a big farm, several acres, and some of us have smaller places. What would you think would be the one thing we could do to do that regeneration? What would be something that your average homeowner, small farm, what do you think the best thing for us to do that you could translate from what you do to what we do?
Oh my gosh, all of it. You all are gonna have more biodiversity. Even in all these photos of my farm, right? We're still long 600 square foot rows of monocrop, right? It's just mini monocrops all in there. You all have way more diversity in your approaches, no doubt. So you're gonna have great biodiversity. If you're doing like drip irrigation or have some rain gardens and are doing some mulching and cover cropping, then you're doing that care for water, and really helping rejuvenate those soils through that work. And composting, I feel like can be really approachable, though sometimes rodent-filled adventure. But they're just like, it's also, we've encroached on their home. And also we've co-evolved with these critters, right? All the raccoons and rats and coyotes that we see all around town. Like, they're just learning to like live urban with us. Sometimes not to our preference. And so it's like finding that balance and sharing space with each other and just recognizing that we're all just trying to live a comfy life. It's just that rats find compost yummy. Yeah, so I think that that's some of it, right? And then you know, they had this really kind of jargony term for integrative pest management. But again, it's just you know, learning, you know, I think pests and weeds get a bad rap. And I think those are like derogatory terms maybe for the poor critters. Like, again, they're just trying to live life and do well and have kids and keep going, right? And they're just unfortunately located plants is what I call a lot of weeds. And they're just trying to like play their role in the world of like even having long big tap roots to undo compaction or to like make sure the soil is covered to reduce the impact of rain and other footsteps and stuff, right? They're just trying to do what they do best in the ecosystem. And with pests like flea beetles or aphids or something, it's kind of an indication that the system's off balance. And they are, for whatever reason, flourishing given the conditions because we're off balance. So really learning that and learning how to recalibrate and like recognize that maybe we need more predatory critters back into that system to support and balance out that system. I'm sure there's been so many studies and lots of thoughts and twists and turns with Yellowstone and the wolves and then the reintroduction of wolves and how that impacted the waterways there, from anything from songbirds and beavers to the elk and everything, right? But it's an ecosystem. So recognizing that we all need to play a reciprocal role and that wasps, turns out, are sometimes some of our best predatory animals for those pesty pests that we also don't want. So learning to cohabitate and be in space together, I think, is a big part of that. Yeah.
And we can do that, and we can do that at our small home gardens as well as you do it. So
Yeah.
Well, we're getting close to the end. I have one more question. How many types of seeds do you collect? Seems like you're doing a lot of seed collecting.
Yeah. So I have a 600 square foot space of camas lilies that I've been collecting seed from each year. And then I have some farewell to spring Clarksia, which is that seed itself was a traditional in a combination with other prairie kind of oak savanna native habitat in our Willamette Valley. Those grains would get mixed up into like a porridge or a mush. But you can also eat the little pink flowers on it. Clarksia is the bio name, I think. And we have some lupin. And then the vegetable seeds I collect, I have, we have Swiss chard forever. That was a big crop. Lettuce seeds are a big one I save and keep. A lot of our peppers and tomatoes have fairly small isolation spaces for cross. So those are really good ones too to engage in. I don't recommend, we don't do a whole lot of cucurbits, any of them, because they're a little too promiscuous.
Yes, they are.
Yeah, as is corn, which is unfortunate, but my farm site is with like 10 other farmers, so I have to choose kind of the smaller radiuses on plants. So yeah, the eggplants, peppers, tomatoes, sunflowers do okay. Peas and beans we can do pretty well. I do pay attention to some of the legume varieties will cross, but I could usually kind of every other or put them in a different crop rotation space, and we could fit them into we do almost 2 acres on the farm. So I just have to kind of move things around a little bit. And alliums are great, but they're biannuals, and so they have to sit in the ground really long. And with these more snowy, harsh winters we're seeing, there are some ways where you can pull like carrots and the alliums up out of the ground into sand bucket burials and protect them for a while and then replant them again for their second year to go to seed. But those are really beautiful flowers, the alliums. They get tall, so tall. The leeks were like 8 feet tall. And they're really great seeds to keep too.
Well, you're certainly a busy farmer, Michelle. Well, I want to thank you very much for sharing a lot of the culture that's behind what you're doing. And I want to thank all our audience for coming in to hear with us. Don't forget to fill out that survey, and we will see you on the farm.
Awesome. Thank you.
Bye-bye.